They gave every single kid a bright, crinkly gift bag that shimmered in the sunlight, each one overflowing with colorful tissue paper. Every cousin, every niece, every nephew, except my son. Except Aiden. He stood there on the edge of the patio, clutching his sketchbook to his chest like a life vest. His smile was barely there, a soft, uncertain curve at the corners of his mouth. The one he wears when he's trying his hardest to stay brave. I know that smile too well. One after another, Debbie, my aunt, self-declared queen of these family gatherings, called names with the gusto of a carnival barker. Each child would step up to cheers, collect their bags stuffed with plastic toys, gummy worms, and t-shirts with their names printed in bold, cheerful letters, but not Aiden. His name never echoed across the yard. His name was never called. And then, Debbie turned toward him with that signature smirk, curling up one side of her mouth, like she was about to unveil the punchline to a joke only she found funny. "We saved the best for last," she announced, her voice syrupy sweet but sharp underneath. From beneath the serving table, she pulled out a small box, wrapped neatly in shiny silver paper, glinting like some prized treasure. She held it out to Aiden like a magician offering a final trick. His gaze flicked up to me, searching my face for a clue, for reassurance, just like he always does when the ground feels uncertain. And because my heart clenched but my hands were tied, I nodded. What else could I do? He deserved to hope, even if I already knew better. Carefully, with deliberate fingers, Aiden peeled back the paper, his curiosity tinged with caution. The moment he lifted the lid, the breath hitched in my throat. Inside was a dog collar, black nylon, stiff and cheap, with fraying edges that hinted it was an afterthought purchase. Dangling from its loop was a silver tag, glinting cruelly in the afternoon light. Property of Madison. It took a second for the laughter to start. First a few soft snickers. Then it spread like a ripple through the patio crowd, swelling into full-blown laughter. The older cousins clapped, some stomping their feet like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all summer. Even a few adults, who should have known better, chuckled into their drinks. From her seat near the grill, Madison Reynolds, Debbie's granddaughter and reigning teen queen of mockery, leaned in close to Aiden and sneered, "Maybe now your mom can finally teach you how to behave." The words hit like a slap. My vision tunneled, but my body stayed frozen, paralyzed in that awful limbo between rage and humiliation. My fingers wrapped so tightly around my glass of sweet tea, I could feel the thin plastic start to give under the pressure. It was the only thing grounding me, keeping me from doing something reckless. Across the patio, Aiden's small hands had begun to tremble, but he didn't cry. My boy, my sweet, gentle boy, just stood there, his shoulders hunched, his gaze dropped to the collar, resting heavy in his lap. The weight of it was more than nylon and metal. It was every snide comment, every whispered insult, every time they'd treated him like less. And then, just as the suffocating silence between my heartbeat and my restraint reached its breaking point, the front door crashed open. The sound was sudden, sharp, slicing through the cruel laughter like a blade. Every head turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Plastic cups paused halfway to lips. And standing in that doorway was the last person they ever thought they'd see again. The man they had written off years ago, the one whose absence had been spoken of only in bitter undertones. My father, Frank Jordan. And in that instant, I knew everything was about to change. If you've ever found yourself in a moment where everything shifted, where you realized your voice mattered, I'd love for you to be part of this space. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. These stories are for anyone who's ever had to reclaim their dignity, one step at a time. Because sometimes, the most ordinary invitations carry the weight of an entire history. The invitation came as predictably as the humid Alabama summer air. An all-too familiar group text pinged into my phone, Debbie Reynolds' name emblazoned proudly at the top, followed by a dizzying chain of 25 Reynolds kin. She titled it, as she did every year, The Reynolds Family Bash, decked out in capital letters, flanked by confetti emojis, and accompanied by that same tacky flyer graphic she'd been recycling for half a decade, dancing silhouettes that gave it all the aesthetic of a third-rate nightclub event rather than a backyard family gathering. I hadn't planned on going this year, not because of some convenient excuse about being too busy or too far or too tired. No, it was far simpler, far pettier than that. Every time I set foot at one of these so-called reunions, I left smaller than when I arrived, as if with every hour spent in that house, a little more of me folded in on itself, retreating to the silent corners of their conversations. Conversations laced with inside jokes I had never been part of and never would be. Smiles that tightened when the subject turned, inevitably to me, the single mother of the artsy boy, who, according to them, just needed toughening up. The comments always came wrapped in laughter, casual little jabs disguised as concern. Raising a boy on your own, that's not easy, they'd say, their eyes gleaming with something less than kindness. Maybe Aiden just needs to get roughed up a little, put some hair on his chest, and I would smile, always smile, because what else could I do? Swallow it down, wear the mask, play the game. But Aiden wanted to go. He always wants to go. At 11, his memories are curated collections of joy, the creak of a weathered porch swing, the smoky tang of barbecue in the air, the feel of rough concrete beneath bicycle tires from the summer Uncle Bobby taught him to ride. He doesn't remember the glances, the snide remarks, the way Debbie's voice sharpens when she talks to us as if we're a charity project on stale. So, I packed his favorite hoodie, the blue one, faded and fraying at the cuffs like a well-loved secret, and we made the long, quiet drive out to the outskirts of Birmingham. Debbie's house loomed ahead, unchanged and unrepentant, a sprawling monument to excess and appearances. 3 acres of manicured land that insisted upon its own importance, with white columns standing guard out front like sentinels of Southern propriety. An American flag flapped noisily in the breeze, its colors as bold and performative as the woman herself. Underneath the eaves, speakers blared classic rock at a volume designed less for ambiance and more for domination, while the smell of charred ribs clung to the air, thick and unrelenting, as if it had become part of the very atmosphere. She greeted us with arms flung wide, a smile too practiced to be anything but performative, and a cloud of perfume so cloying it made my eyes water. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with their presence," she announced, loud enough to ensure no ear went untouched. "Thought y'all got lost again?" A dig disguised as a welcome, as predictable as the humidity. We had arrived right on time. Aiden tilted his face up to her, his lips curving into a polite, small smile. "Hi," he said simply, his sketchpad tucked protectively under his arm like a knight's shield. His fingers found mine, squeezing just enough for me to feel the silent question there. "Are we okay? Are we safe?" And I answered the only way I could with a gentle squeeze back, grounding us both. Inside, chaos reigned supreme. The Reynolds family had perfected the art of loud children darting between legs in wild pursuit of nothing, cousins yelling over one another as though volume equated to relevance, adults pretending this was a portrait of familial bliss instead of what it truly was, a fragile performance held together by old habits and thin veneers. Half the people in that house hadn't spoken since the last gathering, but today they were one big noisy fractured tribe. At the epicenter of it all was Debbie, orchestrating every detail with the precision of a general. She dictated the flow of conversation, assigned seats like a self-appointed queen, determined who would be drafted into kitchen duty and who would be spared. Resistance was futile, compliance expected. Most obliged because it was easier to laugh, nod, and keep the peace than to risk being labeled difficult. Aiden and I slipped away to the back patio, seeking the quiet solace near the fence line. He perched himself on a folding chair, his knees pulled up slightly as he opened his sketchbook, pencil in hand, his focus immediately tethered to the barn across the field. He has always been this way, drawn to the serenity of lines and shadows, content in observation while the world spins loud and chaotic around him. The other kids' games held no interest, their noise, no appeal. From my own seat, I sipped sweet tea that tasted more like liquid syrup, the saccharine coating my tongue as I watched my son retreat into his art. I tried, futilely, to convince myself this wasn't already exhausting. That's when Madison Reynolds made her grand entrance, gliding past with her entourage of teenage sarcasm. 14, going on 30, her phone was permanently fused to her palm, her gaze flitting over Aiden's drawing with a sneer that curled her lip. She whispered something sharp to the 2 girls trailing her like shadows, triggering a ripple of giggles that sliced through the afternoon air. I heard it. Of course I did. But I didn't respond. Because here, speaking up carried consequences. Here, if you disrupted the carefully curated illusion, you became the problem. To call it out was to ruin the vibe. So I sat there silent, telling myself it was just one afternoon, just one more day of enduring for the sake of appearances, for the sake of those tiny scraps of connection we still salvaged from this fractured family. But the weight of that silence was getting heavier. Aiden wasn't little anymore. He was starting to catch the subtle venom laced in their words, the dismissive tones masquerading as jokes. He was noticing the way his name never came up for games, the way Madison shifted her chair to avoid sitting beside him, and it struck me, with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. If I kept shrinking myself to keep the peace, I was teaching my son to do the same. I couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not this year. The first omen of what was to come arrived quietly, slipping under the radar. The music changed. Debbie's gatherings were always soundtracked by her beloved old-school R&B, smooth rhythms of Earth, Wind, and Fire, the soulful croon of Anita Baker, sometimes a dash of Marvin Gaye if the mood called for it. But now, the speakers thudded with a jarring bass, a hyperactive party anthem, more at home in a frat house than a family yard. This wasn't an accident. This was the signal. It meant it was time for the children's gift bags, a tradition Debbie had initiated 3 years ago under the guise of making the little ones feel special. Plastic water guns, cheap sunglasses, dollar store trinkets, simple, harmless fun. Or at least that's how she sold it. But year after year, it had evolved into something else entirely. A performance, a ranking, a subtle yet public declaration of who mattered most. Debbie would stand center stage, reading off names with the enthusiasm of a game show host, each child parading up to collect their neon-colored bag to the applause of the gathered clan. The adults would pretend not to notice, their polite smiles stretched thin, as if the whole charade wasn't just an annual exercise in subtle humiliation. But we all knew. We knew that every name called, every cheer, every round of applause was a public ranking, a scoreboard of who mattered. Aiden, my son, didn't know that. Not yet. All he wanted was a toy, maybe a high five, some scrap of inclusion. He didn't understand the weight of being last, of being overlooked until it hurt. He just wanted to belong. As Debbie clapped her hands, her voice slicing through the air with forced cheer. All right, babies, come on down. A ragged line of children formed on the patio. The younger cousins jostled for position, their eyes bright, their feet impatient. And there, at the tail end of the line, was Aiden. His small frame seemed even smaller in that moment, huddled around his sketchbook as though it could shield him from the invisible barbs. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, posture casual by design, yet every muscle tense with the effort of holding myself together. My breath, shallow and deliberate, betrayed the truth. I was counting, ticking off each name Debbie called with the precision of a metronome. Brandon, look at you, kiddo, taller every year. Savannah, my little fashion queen, come get your bag, darling. The parade continued, each child basking in a moment of approval as they snatched their neon-colored bags, faces lit with wide grins. Candy wrappers fluttered to the ground like confetti, discarded without a second thought. Madison, ever the chronicler of mockery, filmed it all with the gleeful detachment of a reality show producer. Aiden shifted, restless, rocking subtly from one foot to the other. His smile was still there, but faint, stretched thin across his face, as if he were afraid to give it his full weight. He caught my eye, offering a tentative grin, the kind that asks for permission to host. Then, with the precision of a performer savoring the climax, Debbie feigned surprise. And last but not least, oh wait, she let the words hang, savoring the attention. We actually saved the best for last. Her smile sharpened as she bent beneath the table, producing a small, silver-wrapped box. It gleamed like bait under the unforgiving sun. With a theatrical flourish, she extended it to Aiden. There you go, sweetheart. This one's just for you, she cooed, her voice laced with saccharine venom. Aiden approached slowly, his hands gentle, reverent, as he unwrapped the box. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though the entire patio were holding its breath, waiting for the punchline. Inside lay a collar, black nylon, stiff and cheap, with threads already unraveling at the edges. A small, silver tag dangled from its loop, catching the light in cruel mockery. Property of Madison. The silence didn't come. The laughter did. First a ripple, then a wave. Snickers morphed into full-bodied laughter, bouncing off the patio walls like cruel echoes. An uncle even barked twice, a grotesque punctuation mark. Madison, capturing the moment on her phone, gasped theatrically before collapsing into hysterics. Maybe now he'll listen better, huh? Someone sneered from the crowd. Debbie's voice cut through, smug and triumphant. Just a little reminder. Mama, you've got yourself a good boy. You just need a firmer grip. Aiden stood there, the collar hanging limp in his hands, his face a blank canvas of confusion and hurt. He didn't cry, he didn't flinch, but his shoulders had collapsed inward, his chin tucked low, as though he could fold himself small enough to dissipate. I knew that posture, knew it intimately. It was the same one I had worn too many times before, the stance of someone trying to understand why they had become the joke, why their dignity had been so easily bartered for a cheap laugh. My throat burned. My fists clenched tight at my sides. nails biting into my palms. Rage bloomed beneath my skin, hot and suffocating. I wanted to tear the collar from his hands, to hurl it into the fire pit, to unleash every sharp word I'd swallowed over the years. I stood. The motion was slow but seismic. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. As I took my first step toward Aiden, each footfall echoing louder in my ears, my pulse thundered against my ribs. My vision sharpened to the narrow tunnel that led straight to my son. But before I could reach him, before I could gather him into my arms and unleash the fury clawing up my throat, the front door slammed open. The crack reverberated through the patio, a violent punctuation mark that silenced the world. Cups froze midair. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Laughter, once so bold, withered into an awkward, elongated breath. Aiden's head turned instinctively toward the noise, the collar still limp in his hands, as if it might offer an explanation. And then I saw him. Standing in the doorway was the ghost of a man none of them had expected to see again. My father, Frank Jordan. A decade had passed since his last appearance at a family gathering, his name spoken only in hushed, bitter undertones. Yet there he stood, plain, unassuming in faded jeans and a white short-sleeved button-up, an ordinary man carrying the weight of extraordinary presence. His arrival struck the gathering like a thunderclap, silent but electrifying. Even Debbie's infallible smile faltered, slipping from her lips as recognition dawned. From the grill, Uncle Bobby muttered a gruff, "What the hell?" But Frank spared them no glance. His gaze locked onto mine, then shifted to Aiden, and finally settled on the collar. His jaw tightened, the muscles flickering beneath weathered skin. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of carpentry, curled into fists at his sides. My father was never a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. And when he was angry, you felt it like the air itself had thickened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice a low growl, sharp enough to cut through bone. No one answered. He descended the steps with a deliberate calm, each measured stride a quiet declaration of war. Reaching Aiden's side, he crouched in old, familiar motion that seemed to shrink the world around them. Gently, with a reverence none of them deserved, he took the collar from my son's trembling hands. He read the tag, his lips pressing into a thin, unforgiving line. Straightening, he turned to face Debbie. "You gave this to my grandson." The silence was deafening. Debbie blinked, scrambling to reclaim her usual composure. "Now hold on, Frank. It was just a little joke. Don't." The word was soft, deadly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in that single syllable was absent. "Don't you stand there and call it a joke while that boy's standing here looking like he did something wrong." The ripple effect was immediate. Laughter faded into uneasy shuffling. The cousins who had chuckled now found the dirt remarkably fascinating. Some had the decency to look away. Frank turned to Aiden, placing a large, steady hand on his shoulder. "You didn't deserve that," he said, his tone warm, unwavering. "None of this is your fault." Aiden's nod was slight, a barely there motion, but his spine straightened beneath my father's touch. From the canvas bag slung across his back, Frank pulled out a small, unadorned wooden box. "This," he said, holding it out to Aiden, "is what I brought for you. I didn't wrap it, figured it didn't need to be dressed up." Aiden accepted it with cautious fingers, flipping open the lid. Inside lay a leather-bound sketchbook, his name elegantly embossed on the cover. Beneath it, nestled in a velvet-lined tray, a complete set of charcoal pencils, blending stumps, and precision erasers awaited. "Real artist tools," Frank said, a smile ghosting the edges of his mouth. "Not toys." He glanced at me, then back at Aiden. "Your mom told me you like to draw. Said you see things different. That's a gift. This is for you to keep seeing like that." Aiden's hand brushed over the supple leather, his fingers tracing the embossed letters as though grounding himself in the moment. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The tension that had laced his small frame eased, his shoulders loosening, his grip steady. For the first time that day, he was holding something that was his. Truly his. I looked at my father, this man whose absence had once carved canyons through my life, who had slipped out the back door of our family without a proper goodbye, leaving only echoes of his name behind. He hadn't been to a Reynolds gathering since the day he stood on this very porch and told Debbie she had poisoned everything good in this bloodline. A lifetime ago, and yet here he was again. Not perfect, not a savior, just a man who had stumbled, fallen, stayed away far too long. But in this moment, he saw my son. He showed up, and that mattered more than all his flaws. I stepped forward, closing the distance between Aiden and me, resting a hand on the curve of his back, feeling his small frame still tense beneath my palm. Then I turned to Debbie. My voice was steady, though my heart thudded like a war drum. I'm done letting you humiliate us while everyone else pretends not to see it. She opened her mouth, the reflex of defense ready on her tongue, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm done smiling through it. Done coming here, year after year, watching my son shrink just so you can feel a little taller. We don't need this. We never did. For the first time, Debbie Reynolds, the queen of this broken dynasty, took a step back. A flicker of something unspoken crossed her face, though she masked it quickly. But I saw it. I saw her falter. Without waiting for permission, I reached for the cheap black collar, its nylon coarse against my skin, and dropped it onto the table with a soft but decisive. Then I took Aiden's hand in mine, his fingers curled tightly around the new sketchbook Frank had given him, and we walked away from the table, away from the suffocating weight of generations of small cutting cruelties. Frank fell in step behind us. No one stopped us, because deep down, beneath the thin veneer of their smirks and polite lies, they all knew the joke wasn't funny anymore. I expected more. A part of me braced for Debbie's parting shot, a snide comment flung like a spear as we retreated. Maybe a dismissive laugh. Maybe one of her syrupy sweet non-apologies dipped in sarcasm and self-importance. But none came. The patio had gone eerily quiet, swallowed by an awkward hush. We were halfway down the gravel drive when Aiden's small hand tugged at mine. I looked down to find his eyes searching mine, wide and uncertain. "Mom," he asked, voice soft, fragile, "are we really leaving?" I smiled then, a true, unburdened smile. "Yes, baby, we're leaving." He nodded, absorbing the weight of that freedom, his gaze dropping back to the sketchbook pressed against his chest like armor. Frank's boots crunched against the gravel as he drew up beside me, clearing his throat in that deliberate way of his. "I parked out front," he said, voice gruff. "Didn't think I'd be staying long." I quirked an eyebrow. "You came to stir the pot?" A low, rumbling chuckle escaped him, more breath than sound. "I came because you texted me last week. And something about the way you asked, I don't know. Figured maybe it was time." He glanced down at Aiden, then back at me. "I knew Debbie would be Debbie. But that," his words trailed off, the image of the collar hanging between us like smoke. That was beyond cruel. He didn't need to say the rest. The guilt clung to him like the sticky southern heat, thick and suffocating. Maybe it had taken something so ugly, so undeniable, for him to finally see it. Or maybe, deep down, he had always known, but needed the sharpness of this moment to shake him awake. We reached the edge of the driveway. The house loomed behind us, still and silent. Debbie had vanished inside, retreating into her kingdom of denial. Some of the cousins busied themselves with the food table, their hands rearranging platters that didn't need rearranging. A few watched us leave, their expressions unreadable masks. No one came after us. Until Madison. She emerged hesitantly from the side of the house, her phone conspicuously absent, her hands awkward and empty. The bravado was gone, stripped away, leaving a girl who looked lost inside her own skin. She approached slowly, her usual saunter replaced by tentative steps. "I didn't know they were going to do that," she said, words tumbling out with none of her usual sharpness. "The collar, I thought it was just going to be, I don't know, a joke." Aiden said nothing. His face was blank, unreadable, but his silence was not the silence of defeat. It was a new kind of quiet, measured, powerful. Madison turned to me then, her bravado crumbling. "I'm sorry. I didn't let her off the hook so easily." "Tell him," I said. She swallowed, her throat bobbing visibly before turning her gaze back to Aiden. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter this time, but real. Aiden blinked, then lowered his gaze back to his sketchbook. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence said everything. We climbed into Frank's old F-150, the familiar scent of sawdust and gasoline filling the cab as we pulled away. Aiden sat between us, his fingers tracing the embossed letters of his name on the sketchbook's leather cover. The pages were untouched, pristine, a blank canvas waiting for him to reclaim the narrative. For several long, beautiful minutes, no one spoke. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the windshield, golden light pooling in the truck like a quiet benediction. With every mile, the air felt lighter, as if we were leaving more than just the Reynolds house behind. Finally, Frank broke the silence. "I used to think walking away was easier than fighting. Your mama, she was the glue. When she passed, I figured it wasn't my place anymore." I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur. You were wrong, I said, voice soft but certain. I know, he replied, his gaze flicking toward Aiden. I don't want to miss anything else. Aiden didn't look up, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Don't, I said. And in that simple word, something heavy lifted. No, not everything was fixed. Not all wounds were healed. But in that truck, with the evening light painting our faces, something new took root. Something stronger than resentment. Something closer to hope. Aiden flipped open the first page of his sketchbook, pencil poised, and began to draw. We never returned to another Reynolds reunion. Not that year, not the year after. Debbie never reached out. No apology, no backhanded text masquerading as amends. But I hadn't expected one. I didn't need one. Some people wear their pride like armor, and Debbie Reynolds had been wrapped in hers for so long I doubted she remembered how to take it off. Aiden never asked to go back. He never asked why they did it. The collar was never mentioned again, but something fundamental shifted in him that day. He didn't shrink. He didn't break. He simply grew quieter in a different way. A deliberate, self-possessed quiet. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for others to choose you and start choosing yourself instead. A few days after we got home, I found him at the kitchen table, his head bent low over the sketchbook. On the page, he had captured it all: the porch, the table stacked with gift bags, the frozen faces of cousins mid-laughter. Debbie was there, immortalized in graphite, one hand perched on her hip, wearing that familiar smirk she wore like a signature shade of lipstick. The details were ruthless, in their honesty, each pencil stroke carved with the precision of memory unsoftened by nostalgia. On the page, the familiar scene unfurled: Debbie's wraparound porch, the table lined with garish gift bags like trophies of pettiness, cousins frozen mid-laughter, their faces etched with careless cruelty. And then there was Debbie herself, immortalized in graphite, standing with one hand perched on her hip, wearing that smirk she favored like a signature shade of lipstick, bold, defiant, oblivious. But in the far corner of the drawing, Aiden had added something that hadn't existed that day, something he needed to see. He had drawn himself, not small, not hunched, not clutching a collar like a question mark. He had drawn himself walking away, and beside him, two figures kept pace: me, his mother, and Frank, his grandfather. We were leaving together, heads high, backs straight. For a long while, I couldn't speak. I simply sat beside him at the kitchen table, staring at the image until the lump rising in my throat became a tidal wave I could no longer hold back. The silence between us was heavy, yet filled with an unspoken understanding, deeper than words could reach. I drew it the way it should have felt, he said, his voice soft but sure. In that moment, I knew Aiden had grasped a truth that had taken me nearly 3 decades to comprehend. Family is not defined by shared bloodlines or photo albums filled with forced smiles. Family is made of those who stand up for you when the laughter cuts deep. It's built by those who step forward when others shrink back. Family is who teaches you that dignity isn't something you have to earn. It's something you're born with. That drawing became the first page of something bigger. Aiden titled the collection What I Saw, a series of moments revisited, reinterpreted through his eyes. Some sketches were raw and painful, pulling no punches. Others held a quiet beauty, small vignettes of tenderness reclaimed from the noise. But every piece was real, honest, unflinching. We framed that first one, the porch, the collar, the walkaway, and hung it above the fireplace. It rests there now, a sentinel above the mantel, where our Christmas stockings gather each year, beside candid snapshots of birthdays, Sunday hikes, and the quiet, golden days when it's just us, our real family. Aiden no longer asks about the cousins. He doesn't pine for the gaudy gift bags, the hollow fanfare, or the suffocating porch. But he remembers Frank. He remembers the man who, when no one else did, chose to show up. True to his word, Frank kept coming back. At first it was tentative: Sunday afternoon visits, phone calls on quiet school nights, birthday cards that arrived late but were thoughtfully handwritten. No grand gestures, no sweeping apologies, just presence, just consistency. Slowly, the cracks began to mend. The day Frank sat beside Aiden at his very first student art show, beaming with a pride he never had to announce, I realized something profound. Sometimes, a single moment, a slammed door, a cheap collar, a quiet stand, can replant the roots of an entire lifetime. I changed, too. I stopped shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for me. I stopped letting silence devour me every time someone's words crossed a line. That afternoon on Debbie's patio, I didn't just walk away from a family reunion. I walked away from a version of myself I no longer recognized, the woman who kept her head down, who smiled through disrespect, who whispered to her son to be patient when what he needed was a shield. Now, when Aiden looks at me, he sees more than his mother. He sees a woman who stood up when it counted. And when I look at him, I see a boy who knows his worth, who no longer waits for others to validate his right to take up space. That is the legacy I want to leave. Not just survival, not mere endurance, but pride, self-respect that runs deep and quiet, a strength that doesn't require an audience. We don't attend the Reynolds reunions anymore, but every summer we create something new. Small, intentional gatherings. Just a few good people, close friends, Frank, neighbors who feel more like family, Aiden's art teacher who always makes time, no collars, no jokes at anyone's expense, no thrones to impress. Just laughter that feels clean, love that doesn't sting. And every year, as the last guest leaves, I catch Aiden's eye and remember that day. The weight of that sketchbook in his hands. The moment he chose creation over cruelty. The moment I learned we were never the ones who should have carried shame. They were. And we are better for having walked away. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred a memory of your own turning point, your own quiet revolution, I'd love to hear it. Share it. Let someone else know they're not alone in that moment of choosing themselves. And if these stories speak to you, if you believe in the quiet power of resilience and the beauty of standing tall, then stay with us. Tap that like button. Subscribe. Help us build a space where real stories matter. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear this today. Thank you for being here.